All right, guys, so today we are just going to talk about our p16s that we use here to control our in-ears. So we're going to start from the bottom, work our way up, and hopefully this will help you understand them a little better, and we'll talk a little bit about some guidelines for doing your in-ear mix, and hopefully it'll make your worship experience a little more pleasant as we go forward in the future. So, like I said, starting at the bottom, we have 16 channels. They are labeled. I make these labels every week to fit if anything changes. But this one's pretty standard. So we have 4 vocals here, vocal effects, acoustic guitar, electric guitar. I had to abbreviate those because there's only so much room, but hopefully that makes sense. Then we have our bass. We have keys that's taken up 2 channels because it's stereo, drums, stereo, tracks, stereo. And all of these are just instruments, really. Kind of, you can mix them as you need to. And then we have our click. Click's going to be your timekeeper. It's going to be right almost all the time. So you definitely want to be able to hear that. And then we have our room mics over here and channel 16. Those are just to kind of maybe let you hear people in the congregation a little more, have a little more ambience in your ears. And also over here, these effects by the vocals. Those are vocal effects, so like reverb and delay. They just give some space, ambience, help it not feel quite so dry and weird. So between these room mics over here and the effects, it just kind of helps your ears feel a little more natural, a little less isolated. It's a good thing. And then right above all our channels, starting here on the right, is our volume knob. So whichever channel you select, you can control your volume for it. Makes sense. One important thing is if you press in the volume knob like that, you'll hear it click. You'll notice that all these lights turn off. That's because it's muting that channel. So if you should be getting sound from something, but then you go to it and its lights are off like this, you can just press in the volume knob and you should be able to hear it. Moving over, we have our pan. So this is just moving stuff left or right. That just helps you get a little more separation in your ears. So theoretically, let's pretend we're Joe. We're right in the middle of the stage. To our right is Lee. So we're going to pan him to our right a little bit. To our left is Rick. We'll pan him to the left a little bit. And that just kind of helps get a little more separation in your ears, especially with vocalists or guitars or kind of stuff with like similar frequency ranges. If you pan it, it just helps everything come through a little more clear. And it's also kind of nice to have stuff panned relative to where they are on stage, just so you know where to look if you hear something weird. And then moving over here, we have our main volume. So this can be controlled. I usually leave it at like 70, 75%, depending how it looks. So like 3 dots off and then the rest on. I usually just set this and leave it. You shouldn't really have to mess with it that much, but in case you need to, that's where it is. And then right here we have solo and mute buttons. Our solo button lets us listen to just one channel at a time. So you hit solo, you can bounce between stuff. So I'll kind of show you. This way we are just hearing our click. If we want to just hear Joe or just drums, let you do that. And then our mute button just will mute a channel. So if we're going and we don't want that electric in there, muted, no acoustic, just like that. And like I said earlier, if you're on a channel and none of the lights are on, you can press this and that will unmute it. Or you can do it here, and that'll work also. So that's those buttons. And then to the top of our P16s, we have some buttons over here. So our link channel lets you pair 2 channels together, but this lets us put our stereo sources on one fader. So instead of having to like control each of the channels individually and like try to match their volumes, it just gives you one that controls both of them, which is pretty nice. Kind of a similar thing, this group button lets you pick whatever channels you want and put them in a group. So then when you select one of them, it selects all of them and will change the volume for those. I don't think anybody really uses that, but if you needed to, you could. Next we have our recall and our store buttons. These are just so you can save your mix or recall it it's a little tricky because who knows where people are saving stuff. So for store, you hold down the button and then you'll press wherever you want to save it. And then you'll see this red light pop up and you want to press it one more time. That's just confirming that you're going to save it. So then if we change something, then this recall button, you do the same thing, hold it down, and you're going to press where you want to recall, and you'll notice it pops right back up. So that's how those kind of work. So store, just hold it down, press wherever you're going twice. Recall, hold it down, press whatever you want once. Then we have our equalizer right here. So bass, mid, and a frequency, and then treble. So, I mean, it's an equalizer, so you can turn up or down your bass. That doesn't necessarily mean your in-ear monitors are capable of handling it, but you can turn it up or down. You can turn up your mids and choose what frequency that's on too. Or a treble, if something's super harsh, you can kind of turn those down a little bit. And those do work per channel, so you'll notice they kind of change how lit up they are depending where you're at. That's because they're different on that channel. I wouldn't recommend messing with the EQ too much. Everything coming to the P16s is post EQ from our soundboard, so it should sound pretty decent, but you can if you really need to, but it's also easy to kind of make stuff sound really weird if you do it wrong. So I would advise some caution with that, but I'm also not going to stop you from doing it either. All right, and our last two knobs here, we have our limiter and our level. So for the limiter, I would recommend just turning it up and leaving it up and don't touch it. It's well-intentioned. It's kind of meant to keep big sound spikes from getting through and being super loud in your ears. And while it's well-intentioned, it just doesn't work great. So if it's lower, it's really... If volume gets to a certain point, it'll start like ducking it down really hard, and it just makes stuff sound super weird. And we've never had a problem with stuff being super loud. So I would just leave the limiter up and control things with your volumes, and you'll be fine. And speaking of volumes, we have a level knob. So this in the main kind of do similar things, but it just matters where you change it, I guess. So level is just your master volume for everything. So I usually leave that around 50%. So main's around 70%, level around 50%. Just kind of works pretty well. So yeah, that's everything on the P16s. So now let's look at like some advice for mixing your ears, I guess, a little bit. So I'll kind of start with singers and then talk about some instrumentalists and hopefully just give you some ideas to help you with this. For a singer, you want to make sure you can hear yourself, first of all, so that you know you sound okay. You want to also be able to hear whoever the worship leader is. If you're leading the song, you still might want to keep Joe up loud enough in case he decides to call something out. You also want to make sure you have a pitch reference and a timing reference. So let's say we're Rick right here. We'll go ahead and turn ourselves up. You can kind of go for like 80% for yourself. Again, it varies depending on the person, but this is a general starting place. And then we'll maybe bring Joe up 1 or 2. And then for a pitch reference, we can work with the acoustic guitar, electric guitar, or keys. It just kind of depends on who's playing what and how much they're playing, that kind of stuff. But in this case, we'll go ahead and bring up the acoustic one spot. And then for our timing reference, we have our click, which we can bring up just to make sure we're sticking with that. If everybody's listening to click, everybody's going to be together. I also still have everything up about 3. 3 is a decent starting point for everything, and then you can bring specific things up. I would advise you to not just continually turn things up because eventually you run out of space. So sometimes it can be good to kind of think of, okay, what's too loud that's kind of interfering with what I need to hear. So maybe a guitar is too loud if you're trying to hear a voice or another guitar, that kind of thing. So all that to say, let's listen to this a little. So we're Rick. This isn't actually Rick. It's obviously a female singer. But
chorus, break,
so you can hear that on top. But we still have Joe a little bit, so we can turn him up if we need to. Or back down. Again with the acoustic. So this just gives us a pretty decent mix of everything. If you felt like you were too loud, you can turn yourself down. You can turn yourself up if you don't have quite enough. Again, if you have yourself maxed out and you still don't have enough of yourself, figure out what you can turn down. And then if you need to, you can adjust that level a little bit to give yourself the overall volume that you need. But again, I would advise starting with yourself around 80%, everything else around 30%, and then boosting up a little bit those pitch references and time references and the worship leader. Instrumentalists are kind of a similar thing. Depending what you're doing, you want to make sure you can hear yourself, first of all, and then Joe or whoever's leading the song in case they get off the click or decide to do another chorus or something like that. You want to make sure you can at least hear them well enough to follow along if they go rogue. And then you also want to make sure you have that time reference, so click, and then, kind of mix a little bit of everything else. So, yep, that's kind of the general idea. You can start everything kind of on 3, build up from there. But don't just keep turning stuff up because you run out of space eventually. So, that's some general ideas for mixing your ears. Hopefully that's a decent starting point and you can kind of work from there.